Good morning. We are starting our chapter 9 on the U.S. Dakota War of 1862. Yesterday we talked about our key terms. Let's go over them real quick. Who remembers what agency means? What is the agency, Paisley? It's the U.S. Field Office. So we talked in earlier chapters about how there was an American Indian agent who would oversee the relations. So they're going to play a bigger role in this chapter coming up in trying to work with the American Indians and the government at the same time. Traditional Dakota. Oh, what can you tell me about the traditional Dakota?
Dakota wanted to maintain their culture and resist efforts to make them live like Europeans.
So the traditional Dakota wanted to keep their traditions. They wanted to live how they've lived for thousands of years. They didn't want to change. They didn't want to become like the European Americans. So how are the Farm Dakota different from them, Leah? Yeah, the Farm Dakota did adopt some of those European American ways. They were assimilating, not completely and totally, but they were doing some changes because they were recognizing, hey, there are some good things with changing. Change isn't always bad and scary, so we can do some changes. So the traditional Dakota did not want to change at all. The Farm Dakota were changing and assimilating. Internment Camp. Tristan.
A place where civilian prisoners or political prisoners are held.
Yes, so that place where civilians, prisoners of war, and or political prisoners are held. So if they're prisoners of war, there's too many to put into their jail, right? So back then, if they had a jail, there would be like one cell. So if there's a bunch of people, they can't fit them all into one cell at the sheriff's office. So they have an internment camp where they can put a large group of people. Sometimes we talked yesterday about the civilians, how in World War II we did it with the Japanese Americans. So it can happen with civilians, prisoners of war, or political prisoners. What does it mean to exile someone, Landon? Yeah, it's forcing someone to leave their country or homeland. When you are exiled, you're kicked out. You're forced out. So let's start our chapter 9 on page 169. The U.S. Dakota War of 1862. In the summer of 1862, a complex mix of factors led to the U.S. Dakota War, a deadly conflict with devastating consequences. Explore the stories of individuals who lived through the war and experienced it from a variety of perspectives. Because remember, everybody's going to see it differently. The traditional Dakota are going to see things differently than the Farm Dakota, who are going to see things differently from the agents that are working for the government, who will see life differently than the white settlers. So everybody has their own perspective, an idea of why things are happening, why people are doing what they're doing. So we're going to get a variety of perspectives. Even as the Civil War was splitting the nation in two, another struggle was threatening the lives and futures of many Minnesotans. This one pitted some of Minnesota's oldest residents, the Dakota, against the newest residents, the European and American settlers. By the early 1860s, the Dakota's traditional homelands were rapidly filling up with farms and towns. The 1851 treaties of Traverse des Sioux and Mendota had left the Dakota with a narrow strip of land along the Minnesota River. In 1858, Dakota leaders were taken to Washington, D.C., and kept there until they signed a treaty turning over the northern half of their reservation. So really think about what that means. The leaders are taken to Washington, D.C., and they're not allowed to leave. They are kept there until they sign over even more of their reservation land to the US government. So think about what we read about when these treaties were first being signed, and some of the Dakotas say, well, okay, we're going to give up this land because there's so many in the white European army. We can't fight them. Okay, so we're going to give up our land to them because otherwise they're going to take it anyways, but we're going to get our reservation. And that reservation will be our land. And we will have it forever. And we can live how we want to live. It will be our space. And now, it's only 1858. It's not that much later. Now the leaders are taken to DC and said, you can't go back home until you sign over even more land. They're forcing them into an even smaller area. All that remained of the original Dakota homeland was an even narrower strip, now just 10 miles wide. In just one decade, the Dakota surroundings had changed so quickly that living life as they knew it was no longer possible. So look down at everything that they gave up. So we have the whole state of Minnesota used to be Dakota, the whole state. Then we have the Dakota land ceded before 1851. That's that dark yellow area by St. Paul. That's where Fort Snelling is. Then we have the orange is the lands that were ceded in the 1851 treaty, which is quite a bit. Then we have that dark pink is the land that they were forced to cede in 1858. And then that dark red was land that's taken in 1863. The lighter yellow is other land cessions in Minnesota. So like where the Ojibwe were. Okay, so that's even more land that was taken away. And now look down in that little green box. That's the Winnebago Ho-Chunk Reservation from 1855 to 1863. So look at how tiny that is. And then we have present day boundaries. So really think about all that the Dakota lost and was taken from them. Okay, that is a big, huge change. And when you have your life being taken away like that, the way that you live, are you going to be happy? Are you going to be angry? How are you going to feel about that? How would you feel if somebody kicked you off of your land? You'd be pretty upset. Here they are trusting and saying, well, we're going to make these treaties. At least we'll have our land. So look at that big swatch where that dark pink and the red is. That was their reservation land. And it's gone. They've taken it away from them. Naming a war. Many names have been given to this war over the years. Some include Sioux Massacre, Sioux Uprising, Little Crow's Uprising, and Minnesota Indian War of 1862. These names seem to overemphasize Little Crow's role, downplay the significance of the war, or imply the Dakota were fighting for no reason. So if you say something like the Sioux Massacre, well, it sounds like they just went out and massacred people just, because they're wild and crazy. And that's not the case. There's reasons behind it. Very serious, big reasons. Our textbook, Northern Lights, uses U.S. Dakota War of 1862 because this name shows it was a war between two sovereign nations. This was a big deal. Okay, we don't want to downplay it. We don't want to downplay what happened. This is a big deal. Setting the stage at the Lower Sioux Agency. The Dakota's reservation along the Minnesota River was split into two areas, each with its own government field office or agency. The Upper Sioux Agency was close to the confluence or meeting of the Yellow Medicine River and the Minnesota River. The Lower Sioux Agency was near the confluence of the Minnesota and Redwood Rivers. The U.S. government used Sioux rather than Dakota in their agency names. By 1862, both agencies had grown into small towns. The town at the Lower Sioux Agency was an especially busy place with homes, mills, warehouses, stores, a stable, a steamboat landing, and a schoolhouse. So it was becoming a big town. So if we look back at that map on page 170, that dark pink and the red areas that were taken from the Dakota, you can see where the Upper Sioux and the Lower Sioux are on the Minnesota River there. So you can see the area that was surrounded by reservation at this time. They haven't fully taken all the land yet. European American traders and government workers filled the town at the Lower Sioux Agency. The Dakota lived on the surrounding reservation land. The culture and perspectives of these two groups were very different. These differences led to a tragic conflict. Traditional Dakota. In summer of 1862, many Dakota at the Lower Agency lived in villages with teepees and bark lodges along the south side of the Minnesota River. Each village was led by a respected leader, such as Little Crow V, or Tayoyataidotai, Blue Earth, or Mikado, and Red Banner, or Wapahasha. Families in these villages wanted to continue their traditional ways of life. They were traditional Dakota. They kept their sacred rituals and beliefs, even though the missionaries tried to convert them to Christianity. Men and women often traveled off the reservations to hunt and gather food because nature doesn't know those boundary lines. Okay? Even though there's the lines of here's your reservation land, now you're off the reservation. The deer, the buffalo, they go back and forth. The food crops grow where they grow. Okay, so sometimes the Dakota would leave the reservation in search of that food that's off the reservation. Traditional Dakota preferred a hunting lifestyle. Hunters used game bags like this one to carry muskrats, duck, and other small game. Farm Dakota. So you can see in that picture, the farm Dakota looked very different than the traditional Dakota. By 1862, several hundred Dakota on the reservations were living on farms away from the traditional villages. These farm Dakota grew crops, raised livestock, and lived in wood or brick houses along the main road that cut through the reservation. Most of them, including the Dakota leader Wounded Man, or Taope, abandoned some traditional Dakota customs and adapted to the European American way of life. The farm Dakota wore American-style clothing, and many attended the missionaries' churches. The Dakota were pressured to look as much like European Americans as possible. Men were to cut their hair short, and women were to wear theirs pinned up on their heads. So they were forcing them to look more like the white settlers, giving up their past, giving up who they are. So think about when we made the parfleches and there were the designs on it. There were reasons, there were meanings to the designs that they would put on things. And now they can't have that. So their clothing, when they would do the bead work, there were reasons behind it. There were symbols for stuff. And now they can't have that because they have to dress like the white settlers. So they're forcing them to give up who they were. Adapting to change. During the 1850s, Minnesota experienced a dramatic population shift. In just 10 years, the region went from being inhabited by mostly American Indians to mostly European Americans. The Dakota had to choose how to respond to the changes going on around them. Traditional Dakota tried to maintain the lifestyle they'd known for generations. Farm Dakota saw advantages to the settlers' way of life, and some believed in Christianity. Most Dakota fit somewhere in between those two lifestyles, keeping some of the old ways while also adopting some new ways. So change can be very scary. People say, oh, I don't want to change. This is how we've always done things. This is how we should continue to do things. Some people say, ooh, we should be just like these new people, and they want to change everything. The majority of people are in the middle. I really like this, from how we've done stuff. I like our spirituality. I like the way that we take care of one another and we're generous with everything and it's not all about ourselves, that we take care of our community. But some of what these white settlers are doing makes sense. Their farming makes sense because we don't have the land that we used to have. So maybe we need to learn how to farm the way that they farm. So that way we can learn to grow things for a longer period of time. We can grow more crops. We can have more food. So a lot of people were seeing the benefits of keeping some old, but making some changes. As they became increasingly outnumbered, many Dakota decided it would be wise to show outward signs of fitting in with their new neighbors. By making some changes in appearance, these Dakota believed the newcomers would not feel as threatened by them and would leave them alone. In addition, some people had both Dakota relatives and European American ones. For them, choosing one side over the other was even harder. So some of the Dakota were saying, you know what, maybe we should look a little bit more like the white settlers because they're scared of differences. They're scared of what they don't know. So if we look more like them, they'll feel comfortable around us. They won't be as scared of us. And then we can just live our lives. Nolan and Anthony, I need you to stop communicating with one another across the room. It's distracting. Thank you. Some of these Dakota, remember how we learned about the traders that would marry into the Dakota tribes so they could build stronger relationships? So now we have Dakota that have mom's side of the family that are the Dakota, and they have dad's side of the family that are the European settlers. And how do I choose between mom and dad? How do I choose one side over the other? Because they're both family. So it's very difficult. Then we have the government workers. So we've learned about the traditional Dakota, we learned about the farm Dakota, now the government workers. In 1862, the top government official at both the upper and lower Sioux agencies was the Indian agent Thomas Galbraith. He was the person responsible for carrying out the U.S. government's assimilation policies on the reservations. These policies were designed to make the Dakota change their traditional lifestyle and adopt European American practices. Many believed the Dakota needed to assimilate in order to survive. So his job is to make them change, to assimilate, to become more like the white settlers. The agent oversaw a number of government workers, including blacksmiths, carpenters, and a doctor. Many of these people lived and worked in buildings surrounding each agency's headquarters. The agent also handed out the food and money that the U.S. government had promised the Dakota under the treaties of 1851 and 1858. Thomas Galbraith. Indian agent Thomas Galbraith expressed his views in 1861 about the Dakota. The beliefs and habits of the Indian must be eradicated. What does it mean to eradicate something? Maddie?
Doesn't it mean to like or like stop?
Yeah, it means to stop it, to do away with it. When you eradicate something, you eliminate it for good. So he says the beliefs and habits of the Indians need to stop completely. They need to completely change. Habits of industry and economy must be introduced in the place of idleness. So they need to change their way of life. Instead of being more relaxed and laid back and just taking care of one another and having a simple way of life, they have to now become industrious and be a part of the economy. We have to make them want more things instead of being laid back. The peaceful pursuit of home life must be substituted for the warpath, the chase, and the dance, and more than all, the hostility of the Indian opposed to this policy must be met on the threshold. So no Indian can oppose this. We can't have traditional Dakota. No more. They all must become like the farm Dakota. They all must assimilate. And if they're fighting against that, we need to meet them and change them. They're not allowed to be traditional Dakota. They must change is what he's saying. The traders. The government allowed a small group of traders, including one named Andrew Myrick, to run stores where the Dakota could buy additional food and supplies. The traders usually worked on a credit system similar to the one used during the fur trade decades earlier. The traders provided goods to the Dakota and expected them to pay their debts when they received their annuities. The traders kept written records of every business deal they made. The Dakota did not. Some Dakota indicated they did not trust all of the traders. This added to tension on the reservation. So let's think about what this means. If the traders are writing down all of the trades that are made and they're keeping a written record, and the Dakota are not writing them down, what could happen? Maddie?
Like Dakota could say, like, I never got or the trader might try to be like, oh, you like did more than what you actually did.
Yeah, the traders might lie. They could write down stuff that's not true. Oh, you got 20 pounds of flour, but really they only got 10 pounds of flour. Or you never paid that back. I'm keeping record, and I don't show payment for that. Katie?
Another thing is that maybe the Dakota could say that they didn't, they forgot of what they got from it.
And so then if the Dakota forget what they did or did not get, they have to rely on what's written down. So the Dakota might not remember it correctly, and if the trader says it's written down, that must be true. The other part of this is it's saying that the Dakota pay their credit off with their annuities. What did we learn about the annuities? Are they always on time? No. And some of the annuities, they don't get as much as they thought they were going to get. So they might overcharge, they might take out too much credit. They might not get the annuities in time to pay it back. So the traders are looking at it saying, well, it's not a guaranteed I'm going to get all of my money back. So Andrew Myrick. Andrew Myrick was a trader who kept two stores, one at the upper and one at the lower Sioux agency. Several historical accounts suggest that Myrick and other traders enraged the Dakota when they dismissed their appeals for food in 1862. They dismissed their appeal. So the Dakota are asking for more food. We have no food. Please give us some on credit. We'll pay you back later. We're starving. And the traders dismiss it. They say, no. It is likely the traders were worried that they would not be paid for their goods. According to one version of the story told decades later, Myrick said, so far as I'm concerned, if they are hungry, let them eat grass. So it sounds very cold. It sounds very uncompassionate. Not the Catholic social teaching at all, right? They're not looking out for one another. But think about it, that trader, if he gives the food to the Dakota and doesn't get paid for it, how is he going to pay for food for his family? So that trader's looking out for himself, looking out for his family. He's saying, I can't give you this food because you're not going to pay me. And then I'm going to go broke and I'm going to starve and my family's going to starve. So he's in a hard spot. He maybe wants to help out the Dakota, or maybe he doesn't care about the Dakota because they're too different from him. Whatever way, the Dakota are not getting the food that they need to live. Not that they want, that they need to live. Stephen Riggs. Oh, wait. Sorry. I missed the bottom. Missionaries. A few settlers in the area were missionaries. Their main goal was to convince the Dakota to give up their spiritual traditions and accept Christianity. Missionaries lived among the Dakota. Many learned their language. They got to know many Dakota well and often spoke up for them during disputes with fur traders and the Indian agent. By 1862, two missionaries, Samuel Hinman and John Williamson, had founded churches near the Lower Sioux Agency. They believed the only way for the Dakota to survive was to adapt to their new situation. The U.S. government's policies toward the Dakota supported this goal. So the missionaries are the people going in saying, hey, have you heard about Jesus? You've been living your lifestyle and you've been kind of isolated. Did you know that Jesus was the Son of God? Did you know about God? And they're teaching the Dakota about this new religion. Some Dakota are saying, oh, that makes sense. That's why things are happening how they're happening. God is behind everything. He's the reason for everything. Interesting. And they're converting some of the Dakota to Christianity. Then there are other Dakota, the more traditional Dakota, who are saying, no, that's not what our faith teaches us. We believe in these other spirits. We believe in something different, and we don't want to change. The missionaries tried to defend the Dakota. They're thinking about those Catholic social teachings, thinking about taking care of everyone. But they're saying, you know, the only way you're truly going to survive is if you assimilate. If you continue how you're doing, distancing yourself from the white settlers, it's not going to work out. We want you to be able to survive. So we want you to become Christian so you can survive the white settlers coming in. You're outnumbered. So the missionaries were trying to be compassionate, trying to take care of the Dakota, but they were also trying to make them assimilate, which goes along with what the U.S. government wanted them to do. Stephen Riggs. Stephen Riggs was one of the missionaries who participated in the treaty negotiations of 1851. He and a small group of farm Dakota had founded a community at the Upper Agency in 1856. The community disbanded in 1860 because the traditional Dakota were constantly harassing or bullying them. They're saying, we don't want to change. We don't want your religion. Go away. So they finally disbanded because the traditional Dakota were fighting against them. It is true that the change of dress does not change their hearts, but in their estimation, it does change their relations to the Dakota religion and customs. It is quite a step for an Indian to take. It is related to the wife of one of these men at the Lower Sioux Agency that whenever she looked at the short hair of her husband, she cried. Because she was used to it being long, because that was their way. And every time she looked at him, she was reminded of that change that they had to make. So it's another way of looking at that. With that, we are going to say goodbye to our friends listening at home. We hope that we will see you soon and you have a good